With an Irish father and an Italian mother, I'd naturally grown up a little confused. I didn't see much future as a spaghetti waiter at Mama Luigi's or pushing a pen at City Hall. So I drifted from this to that. You know, walking the line, trying hard not to fall either side. Until that was the night I walked into this place, Fat Sam's Grand Slam, the liveliest joint in town. Bugsy Malone, yours truly, at the age of 15. And in those years, I was pursuing a famous acting career. I had just been in Harry Potter. I retired early after that, after that hit. And I was, in my heart, I desired that fame. I desired that fulfillment, that recognition. But in that same year, at the age of about 15, God pursued me and my life changed. But before I get there, let me give you just a little bit of a background of who I am. You've seen my parents here today, John and Sue. My dad is actually Irish. That's the great thing about it, Bugsy Malone. There's the link. And grown up in an extremely loving family. Mum and dad always there for us. Dad working so hard, mum working so hard. They loved me and my brother Sean so, so much. They blessed us with wonderful times. They stuck with us through rain and shine on the side of the football pitch, cheering us on. And they took us on lovely holidays. We went to see our Uncle Kevin in Australia in 2002. Such a blessed upbringing, genuinely. Of course, ups and downs like there is in every family, but so, so grateful for their lives. But like I said, at 15, something really changed for me. And very sadly, a friend of mine died in a drowning accident. And when he died, it hit our community like a ton of bricks. There was, just to give you a bit of a context, on a Friday, Saturday night, between 100, 150 young people at the park, at the shopping centres, on a regular basis. And there was a youth work charity named just around the corner who would support us on those evenings. And their slogan was encouraging positive choices. But when Tyson died, there was something almost like a spiritual atmosphere happened in Woodley, and the young people were asking questions about life, about death, and everything was going on. And we were able to ask these Christians really what it was all about for them. And it was me in that atmosphere seeing kind of how these Christians were responding to my friends that opened up my eyes to something that I'd never seen before. They just responded with love. My friends and I were angry. We were grieving the loss of Tyson. And yet the way they took their time with us and talked to us about God, they didn't get defensive. I was used to it. If you ever go at my family, I ever go at yours. If you ever go at my football team, I ever go at yours. But the way they just talked with us and led us through grief was incredible. And I really saw something different in one of the guys. I went up to him, I said, "Look, what have you got? What's different in your life?" And he said these words that changed my life. He said, "I'm in a relationship with God through Jesus." Now, I'd grown up in a very kind of Catholic family where we went along to Mass on a regular basis with my primary school. So I had this faith in God, but he was abstract. He was quite out there. But to be told that I could have a personal relationship with God, it just hit me afresh. And I said, well, if that's how you've got your peace, if that's how you've got your fulfillment, as it were, then I want some of that for myself. And that night I said the sinner's prayer. I said, "Yes, Lord Jesus, you died upon the cross for the forgiveness of my sins, and you rose again for me." And I skipped home that night. And I think I remember speaking to my mum and dad the next few days. I was like, "Right, we need to believe in Jesus. We need to believe in Jesus. We don't want to go to hell. We need to believe in Jesus." And I think they were like, "Daniel, just eat your dinner, please. Thank you very much." Understandably, I think it hit them real hard. It was a shock. Bless my poor nan, Nanny Tess. She'd always get a good mention. Nanny Tess was thinking, "Oh, Daniel's joined a cult now. He joined a cult. What's going on with him?" And my brother Sean was just like, "Nan, genuinely, they're good people. They're okay." And so it was a bit of a shock for us all, especially when I started asking my family. I said, "I know you've been calling me Dan, but can you call me Daniel, please, the whole name?" I think, right, you've truly lost it now, big time. You've lost it now, mate. You really have. So at 15, like I said, the journey started. And in those first few years of being a Christian, actually, it was really, really tough. again, like I said, Tyson died when I was 15 and he was 16. And he was in my larger group of friends. I'm not saying he was my closest friend, but we knew him and it all hit us. But then the grief kept on coming, actually, because in my year group, at the age of 17 and 18, we had 2 friends die, actually. So David Bishop was a young lad at the age of about 17 walking home from Reading after a night out. And he actually got knocked down on the IDR and in Reading. And very sadly, the following year, Lois Russell had a tragic car accident at the age of 18. And very sadly, she passed away. And I remember being in church. By this time, like I said, we were kind of the youth work charity. They were helping us grieve Tyson. And actually, quite incredibly, a church actually formed from their kind of youth work, as it were. So we started up at the park, and then we went to a house, and then we were meeting at a local youth club. And it was actually, there was a lot of kind of, if you will, unchurched young people there able to kind of explore this Christian faith that was very new to us all, as it were. It was becoming a lot personal to us all. And I remember being on my knees, crying, actually, after Lois's death, because my friends were like, Daniel, why are you still going to church? What are you doing? Can't you see what's going on around us? And I just remember just being there on my knees, like I said, crying. And all I could think was that this is good. This is good. I didn't have the terminology to say church was good or God was good. I just knew, thanks be to God, that this was good. Because those other options were out there. Excess alcohol, drugs, Ouija boards. Those things were all going on around our community. And people trying to search, trying to find fulfillment. But that wasn't the path. God was like, this is good. And I just had that in my spirit. And it was a challenge in those days too, because to be fair, not only was God keeping me there, but it was a tussle. In those early days, I was trying to live 1 foot in the world, 1 foot with Jesus. And the scripture that kept on really impacting me was just these short words. What good is it for someone to gain the whole world, yet forfeit their soul? What good is it for someone to gain the whole world and yet forfeit their soul? And I knew Jesus was saying, Daniel, you need to follow me. You need to follow me with all your heart. And as those kind of years went on, when I was about 18, 19, at that sort of time, I was in a relationship with a young girl named Jess. And she had a lovely family, and we all really got on. And what really became quite a challenge, actually, was when I just was at a home group one night, which a home group, for those who don't know, is kind of like a midweek kind of a Bible study or whatever like that. I'd always used to explain it to my parents, like, do you know I go football training in the midweek and then Sunday's the big game? It's a little bit like that for church, you know. And then, so I was at this home group, and I really, really remember a very vivid, if you will, explanation given to us as young people of like, actually, God calls you to a deep, intimate relationship with him. And it was described to me, as it were, as if it was a circle. And God is, if you will, he's in that circle. And in order to come closer to God, he calls you to let go of habits in your life or whatever it may be. God calls you to holiness, effectively. That's what was being said. And I remember I left the hall that night. I left the home group that night. And I just sensed in my spirit, I just knew that God was calling me to greater obedience in my life. And it was particularly within this relationship that I was in with Jess. And he was saying, actually, Daniel, I'm calling you to keep sex within marriage. And it was hard, but I knew that's what God was saying. And actually that eventually put a great deal of strain on that relationship. And very sadly, it did come to an end. But it was that act of obedience that actually I think really propelled me, if you will, God was saying, come on, Daniel, into the life that he had for me. And like I said, that relationship did come to an end. But thankfully, and I even remember afterwards, I was in a very low place. And I was like, I think my parents can remember this. I went, at the age of about 21, I went to Kenya. And I was like, right, I'm going to be a missionary. I'm going to head off. And some friends really challenged me. They said, you're running away. You're running away. And they were right. It was Christian friends saying to me, no, Daniel, you're just trying to run away. Be in this place. And those early years, bless my dad, he had to put up with me. By this time, I'd gone through hairdressing because I'd had a bit of a spell in hairdressing because I thought that was going to be the trade that would see me through to being Hollywood's next big star. Didn't quite happen, but anyway. I still cut my wife's hair, God bless her. She's doing great. And I'd done the hairdressing. That got a little bit tricky with regards to kind of my Christian faith was becoming more and more important to me, and I was talking to my clients. My clients were quite interested, but for the other colleagues, it became quite awkward. So eventually, I actually went and worked for my dad, and we were building 2 new houses. It was always his dream, and it was great that it came about. And I said, Dad, can I work with you? He said, yeah, if you study, you can work with me. Great. And that really taught me a lot about patience, hey? Not on the boss. Not he's a good boss, but effectively, when you're a hairdresser, you've got something new within 45 minutes. It's creative, it's quick. With building, it takes time. And maybe that's a word for somebody today. Be patient. God is working in your life. And working with my dad was great, but I'll tell you, it was where then God was like, I could just feel that I wanted more in the sense of, I enjoyed building, but I felt that God had more for me. And I remember at that sort of time I was also had been doing some youth work volunteering back for the charity, by which I became a Christian. And at that, it was a kind of a midweek, whatever it was, but I just remember just thinking, God, I want to learn more about you. And eventually it came together that I was encouraged, hey, have you ever thought about more Christian education? So I went and studied at a place called Moorlands College. So now this is between 2014 to 2018. I went and studied applied theology whilst I was a youth worker. And it was in those years that actually my Christian faith became more rooted in the Word of God. And actually I left there, and eventually I really sensed this kind of call to Christian leadership. But it was in those years that I met my beautiful wife, Caitlin. In kind of 2017, we were friends of friends. My mum ran around the house when I told her I was going on my first date with Caitlin. That was very exciting. And we got together, and it was a massive, massive blessing. She was the help and encouragement I needed. She really called out on me. She said, Daniel, I think God has got more for you. More for you. Because I think I had my mind quite set, as it were, on being a youth worker and staying with this charity, staying with the church. But Caitlin was, Daniel, I think God's got more for you. And actually, us coming together in the year of 2019, we not only I not only left working for that charity and went and worked for a drug and alcohol rehabilitation centre, working with guys in recovery, which was an incredible experience. We also joined Emmanuel Church in Woodley together, and I began my kind of exploration process in order to be ordained, which is quite a long process. You kind of are mentored for a few years beforehand, before your training. And what I want to draw out of these years, actually, is God being with us in grief. Very sadly, we all experienced the grief of COVID and how that isolated lots of us from our loved ones and families. And very sadly, in 2020, about April of 2020 or so, Caitlin and I very sadly had a miscarriage. And that grief really, really brought us together. And I remember the morning of us going into hospital before we found out the sad news. I remember sitting down with Caitlin, and we read Psalm 23. The Lord is my shepherd. I have all that I need. And Caitlin's response and her saying, actually, God is the one we need in this hardest time, was absolutely inspirational. And so we stuck together through that. And in fact, God worked on our marriage and brought us closer together through that. Because I think that coming together, closeness through grief, actually was very significant through our time at Wycliffe. But I must say, God is very good, because in 2021 we had our first daughter named Grace. Grace Renee, her name obviously, that Renee coming from that word Renaissance, born again, as it were, life. And so we've got Grace, who's 4, and in 2024 we had our second daughter, Ruth. But what happened at Wycliffe, when we got there, we landed, so in Oxford, this is now, I'd worked at the rehab centre, which was really, really impactful in my life, actually, because I think I needed to, if you will, uproot from the charity in order to then grow as a person when I was working with the young guys. We're working with the guys through recovery. Now, working at a recovery centre is pretty brutal in the sense of it is tough emotionally and spiritually and relationally. And these guys, they're going through a lot, but honesty is a real key factor in their recovery. And actually, when you're working with them, you've got to become so honest with yourself. You've got to be, if you will, you've got to grow and be so comfortable in your skin in order to help them in their recovery. Quite a key word in recovery is you can't give away what you haven't got. And so working with those guys, it was a rehabilitation experience for myself. So I'm so grateful for God for that, for giving me that time working with them. Now, like I said, when we were at Wycliffe, throughout the year of 23, very sadly, even some of my family here, we experienced a lot of loss. We lost our dear cousin Liam to a very sad road accident in London. He got knocked down by a bus, and very sadly, he died. And we gathered together as a family to comfort one another through that very sad time. And later on that same year, we'd lost our dear Uncle Michael to cancer. It was a very kind of rapid end to his cancer journey, but he ended with a smile, and that was our Uncle Michael. And before the year was out, very sadly, one of my best mates, who was Adam, who was one of my groomsmen at our wedding, just before Christmas, his stepdad actually died from this kind of heart condition that he was unaware of. And it was in those lowest points of grief that God really just held us and saw us through. Now, grief really changes your perspective on a lot of things. And I think for me, growing up, being one of two boys, we were so competitive. Gosh, we put my mum and dad through terrible times. You know, it didn't matter if we was at Wembley Stadium or in the back garden. We would fight till the very end and just want to beat each other in football. And that competitiveness is deep within my veins. It's deep within my Irish blood, it is. I'll tell you, that's why I'm wearing the green this morning. But what was great is that when God was with us in those times, he's like, look, Daniel, at college, it's not about the scores in your essays and stuff like that. It's about walking with me. Faithfulness. Faithfulness is so key to God. And church, I believe that's what the Lord is saying to us in these days. Faithfulness. And I do want to mention my dear Nan, actually, my mum and my auntie, because even before college was out, even before we'd finished college, and just as it were, you think, surely we've faced enough grief in this short period. We very sadly lost my Nan Doreen. She had a fall, and that fall actually highlighted some quite serious health conditions. And unfortunately, after an operation, her health began to deteriorate more and more. And I did actually mention it here at our APCM, that by the grace of God, we had an incredible time on those last days with my Nan. And just that sense of like God being with us in our grief and holding us in our most darkest times. And there being hope, actually, because it was amazing that even in those times, would you believe it, when I walked in to see my Nan when she was there in ICR, she said to me, Daniel, she showed me the hands of prayer, and she said, Daniel, would you pray with me? And we prayed together on that day. We read Psalm 23 together. And I prayed, if you will, a salvation prayer with her. That morning, would you believe it, completely unconnected, I read the story of the thief on the cross. When Jesus was there upon the cross, one man either side of him, and that one put his faith in Jesus. Now, as I come to a close, I want us to share one story of God's sovereignty. We sung about it today, of actually us as a family coming here. And it was when we were looking for a place to be for Curacy, we came and we got this first interview here. And I was really like, Lord, would you please make it clear where you want us to be? And when we came here, I met Mark, and then Mark said, oh yeah, Daniel, so this is our church, Holy Trinity, and we've got another one at Manor Farm, and we've got one called Church of the Good Shepherd. And my ears pricked up. Would you believe it? When I was at college, I studied the model or the image of shepherd throughout the Bible. And then when I got home that same day, I said, Caitlin, Would you believe it? They've got a church called the Church of the Good Shepherd, and they want us to revitalise it. She went, 1 second. She went over to where her and Grace had been drawing. And on that same day, Caitlin had drawn a picture of a shepherd and a sheep. So God made it clear he wanted us to be here. I wonder if I could just invite the worship team up to as we come in to land, as it were. You've been patient enough to hear my story.